This is a narration of the original 1966 novel This Woman is Dead by Hank Jansen. Chapter 1. I talked non-stop for 5 minutes, worked 2 really funny quips into my preliminary sales blast, and finally talked myself across the threshold into the front room. Getting inside the house is 90% of the business, and if you don't make a sale, then it's because you don't want to. The room was neat and clean. A carbon copy of 1,000 other working men's homes with the largest television set you could buy thrown in the place of honor. A cozy settee with 2 matching armchairs and a portable bar stocked with fancy glasses and unopened bottles. The other furniture was carefully sited in the position it would always occupy, and a large bowl of artificial flowers was placed smack in the center of the table, effectively obstructing its usefulness. There were 2 young kids playing with their toys on the carpet in front of the electric fire. The girl was about 3 and the boy was 5 or 6. He had a pugnacious little face, and he glared resentfully while I tried to coax a few words out of them. I won the little girl over first, got her chortling happily by pretending to tickle her, and in no time the boy was friendly too, jealously competing to gain my attention. Making a fuss of the kids is always another strong move towards gaining the customer's goodwill. He's a handsome little chap, I enthused. What wonderful eyes. He takes after you, you know. When the customer's a woman, and they usually are, a little self-flattery goes a very long way. She was a quiet little thing, mostly 2 huge beautiful brown eyes that stared at me with doe-like placidity. Everything was moving much too fast for her. She was overwhelmed by my eloquence and swept along by my confident self-assurance, and still wondering if she should have spoken the few words I'd virtually put in her mouth that invited me inside. "We'll need a little more elbow room to do the job properly," I said, giving her my sunniest smile. "Now just leave everything up to me." She hovered anxiously while I swept up the large bowl of artificial flowers and deposited it carefully on top of the television set. "I never break anything," I chuckled. "You should see me wearing an apron and handling the dirty crooks. Never slip. Anytime you need help with the washing up, just call on me." She smiled doubtfully, her large brown eyes watching me with doe-like softness. She was about 26, I guess, harried by the housework and the children, and married long enough to resent its dull monotony. She was ripe to be stirred by excitement by any little variation in the unchanging dearness of her day-to-day living. "I'm not a salesman," I told her frankly. "I don't have to be. I'm not persuading you to buy something you don't need. I'm simply showing you the quality and letting it speak for itself." It was important to convince her that she was using her own judgment about buying, so that later on she'd be sincere when she argued about it with her husband. "Nobody could dispute this would be a bargain at double the price," I said as I drew Volume 1 of the Children's Pictorial Encyclopedia from its impressive container. Color printing is the most expensive process known, and there are hundreds of plates in full color. I'd had the container made for me specially. It was of hardboard lined with purple silks and faced with buckram. The title was embossed on the front in gold leaf. The Children's Pictorial Encyclopedia. That container alone looked like a 5-pound note. It should have done, because that is exactly what it cost me. What I didn't mention was the 12 volumes, when delivered, would come in plain cardboard containers. "These days," I said sincerely, "any parent who wants to give their children a good start in life have to begin early." That was a powerful line of attack, hitting the customer where she was the most vulnerable, conjuring up a picture of an assured and glowing future for her children. "Notice the typesetting," I commented, appealing now to a technological knowledge I flatteringly assumed her to possess. "This large, clear-cut typeface was specifically designed for children." She nodded reluctantly, doubtful of my argument. "Jimmy doesn't read yet," she objected. "He's not 6 until the next month." "And now is exactly the time to start," I told her enthusiastically. "Encourage his thirst for knowledge. Give him an incentive to read. There's the color plates too. Everyone telling a story without words. Every young and tender mind is inquisitive, and eager to absorb knowledge. It's a parent's duty to give them every opportunity to expand and develop. While I talked, I turned over the page. I came to a full-color plate of Niagara Falls, with thousands of tons of water cascading into the abyss. White spraying, smoking upwards, and obscuring into a dwarfed ferry steamer in white clouds. "What's this, Jimmy?" I asked, beckoning him and showing him the picture. "Hit them where they're vulnerable. Concentrate on the welfare of the children." Jimmy stared at the picture for a long time. "Water," he said finally. "There," I crowded triumphantly. "Pictorial tuition, you know, these pictures alone in this valuable set of books are an educational miracle." She nodded slowly, convinced against her will, with the brown doe-like eyes, soft and tender. "Would you like a cup of tea?" she invited nervously. She was overwhelmed by my forceful personality and was groping instinctively from a familiar rock of normality to which she could cling. "I'd love a cup of tea," I said, knowing that the homely, cozy act of drinking tea would almost certainly clinch the sale. She excused herself and hurried into the kitchen, while I sat at the table and persuaded Jimmy to perch himself on money. I slowly turned around the pages of the encyclopedia, encouraging him to take an interest in them. There were 12 volumes to the set, and it cost 50 guineas. There was no dishonesty. It was excellent value for money, with 9,840 pages of reading matter, 2,160 pages of illustrations, and 630 of them in full color. But 50 guineas is a great deal of money for a working-class family, and normally beyond its means, unless special payment terms are given. I allowed monthly installment spread over 2 years on the attractive pay-as-you-learn basis that I, Julius, had devised. What always surprised me was how so few buyers totaled up the payments and discovered they were paying an interest of 15% per year on the original 50 guineas. I quizzed Jimmy and discovered he learned the words of Baba Black Sheep at school. I turned to a page of nursery music, and he was following the words with my finger, while he sang lustily when she returned. "You see," I said triumphantly, "he'd learned to read music, too, in no time." She smiled softly as she put the tray on the table and set out to get the cups. "He's rather clever for his age," she told me with shy pride. "He is too," I said enthusiastically and stared at her directly. "Like his mother," I added shamelessly. She flushed, was obviously flustered, and kept her face averted from me while she poured the tea. "Forgive me for staring at you so rudely," I apologized humbly. "But you do remind me so much of somebody I used to know. Somebody I used to care a great deal." "Yes?" Her voice was almost inaudible. I talked on shamelessly. I wasn't selling the books anymore. I was selling myself. The only thing I wanted was a signature on the dotted line. That signature would probably mean 2 years juggling with a family budget for her and almost a week's wages for me. "Have you always lived in this part of the world?" "I used to live in Athens before I got married." "You must have been married very young." 19, she admitted. I sighed. "I'd have liked to have known you when you were 19. She made a supreme effort to stop the conversation, side-slipping into realms that made her breathless and which frightened her. "How much is it for the 12 volumes?" I paused so she could prepare herself for the shock. "A great deal of money," I warned, "but worth every penny of it." I paused again and said quietly, 50 guineas. I was watching her closely and saw her face drop, as I knew it would. What workman's family could spend 50 guineas on books? Of course, in these days, the purchase price of anything is completely irrelevant, I said casually. Everybody buys everything on hire purchase. In fact, I've only got one customer who's paid cash. Everybody else educates the children the same way as they buy a television set. Surely, a children's education was way more important than a television set. Sugar? She asked slowly, digesting my comments. 2, please, I said, staring at her steadily. And I still would have liked to have known you when you were 19. 3 cups of tea, and then half hour later, I left the house with a signature at the foot of a hire purchase form. I left a copy of it for her to show her husband. When he got home, there'd be a bitter argument between them, but he was legally liable for any undertaking into which his wife entered. If he was violent in opposition to buying the book and stubbornly refused to accept the terms of the contract, we'd tear up the contract, of course. But usually, when it was the wife who signed, we could safely leave it all to her, and she'd fight our battle and obtain her husband's grudging agreement. That was my last call for the day, and I rang Julius, booked the order, and went home. Laura had arrived half an hour before me and was in the kitchenette, heating a saucepan full of beans. She said over her shoulder, "Open a can of corned beef, will you, darling?" We usually ate in the kitchenette because we could clean up more quickly afterwards. "You're late," she said as she spooned steaming beans onto a plate. "I made another sale." She raised one approving eyebrow. "That's the 3rd this week. I wish it was only the books I sold," I said cryptically. She was intelligent enough to know what I meant and didn't follow it up. "Can I leave you to do the washing up, John? I haven't got much time." "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." Laura was 5 years older than me, a quiet, intense girl with a mind that was entirely her own. Her emotions were well organized, operated efficiently, and functioned like a robot filing cabinet. She stored up facts like a squirrel saves nuts, and analyzed them and docketed them neatly before filing them away. Whatever she said was always preceded by a slight pause, as though with typical civil service efficiency. She was referring to her mental cards index record. Often, when she paused, I'd find myself listening as though expecting her to hear the soft whir of an opening filing cabinet and the capo flutter of index cards. She'd probably been the most efficient at her job in the Foreign Office until the trouble. The trouble had started about 6 months ago with yet another spy sensation. A harassed MI5 desperate for credit marks to offset their low rating prestige discovered what they could have learned at any point with no difficulty whatsoever. They denounced Laura as a fellow traveler and sympathizer of the Communist Party. Instantly, she was whisked away from a cozy niche in the Downing Street to the antiseptic modernity of Ministry of Supply. It caused a minor revolution in her life, and in mine too, because if Laura hadn't changed her job, she would have never met Harry. And if she hadn't met Harry, the shocking and unspeakable things that happened later might have never occurred. "Going anywhere exciting?" I asked. "Harry's driving me out to the country for lunch, but we'll be back in time for theatre." "Enjoy yourself," I said sincerely, but try as I could fail to prevent a note of bitterness intruding into my voice. "Don't be mean about it, John," she said quietly. "I'm trying hard not to be," I said honestly. Saturday nights had always been a standing date with us to go to the festival hall or Covent Garden together, and it's too hard to drop a long-standing habit. "You'll wash up then, John. I really must change." "Go ahead," I told her. I scoured the plates under the hot tap, dried them, and went into the lounge. The door of her bedroom stood open, and she was drawing on her stockings. "Are you going to be late tonight?" I asked. "Not more than usual." She straightened taut her stocking, stopped, and snapped it onto the suspender tab. "I don't want to embarrass Harry. If you want to bring him back here, I'll stay away tonight." She paused as her mental fingers rifled through mental index cards, hesitated momentarily at sex and passion, and then passed on quickly to marriage, home, and security. "It's sweet of you, John," she thanked me, unrolling the second stocking up her calf. "But that isn't important. We're in no hurry. I'd never met Harry, but I'd gained a lively impression of him from the little she'd told me about him. When she'd been switched to the Ministry of Supply, he'd been her new immediate superior. He was in his 50s, divorced, and shortly due to marry Laura. Civil servants are surprisingly like other ordinary human beings, and Harry, who was unashamed wolf, had fallen heavily for Laura's youth, her zest for life, her bubbling and sparkling modernity, and a disturbingly blunt truthfulness. Laura scorned using feminine subtlety, and right from the start she'd told Harry she'd been living with me for 2 years. He took it like a lamb, conceding her the right to sex equality. But later, when she told him she was finished with me and continued sharing the flat as a convenience of accommodation, he knew it was the absolute truth. Laura shook down her skirt, smothered it across the thighs, and inspected every seam over her shoulder. Satisfied, she stepped into her high-heeled shoes. "Are you going out tomorrow too?" I asked. "All day," she answered. "We're driving down to the coast." "What about the cleaner?" "She'll come early. She knows what to do." "You wouldn't marry me instead of Harry." She gave one last approving glance at her reflection in the dressing table mirror, gathered up her gloves, handbag, and coat, and walked towards the door. She ignored my question completely. I hadn't meant it seriously, but even if I had it would have been difficult to convince her. Marriage and me had never entered her thoughts. My index card probably read, charming, progressive, intelligent, but irresponsible. "Look after yourself, Joan. There's plenty of food in the fridge. Drink all the milk you can. There's pints, too." Her hands rested lightly on my shoulders, and she pecked my cheek. There was the pleasantly familiar smell of her makeup, muffled clip-clop of her high heels on the carpet, and then the soft clicking of the door shutting behind her. I crossed to the window and stood screened behind the curtains, while I watched the courtyard below Laura come into view, walking quickly and effortlessly, her hips rhythmic and her back straight. She turned left, heading towards the high road and the bus stop. A few moments later, a small Ford nosed from the line of cars, parked off the opposite side of the road, and drove off slowly into the direction she'd taken. I could see the trousered legs of its 2 occupants, and I scowled with annoyance. The zealousness of MI5 became ludicrous when far more public money was spent on watching Laura than was paid on a salary. The flat was disturbingly empty and sad when she'd gone. We'd have our quarrels, our spats, and our sulks, but we'd got through 2 years of living together, more or less happily, which is a great deal, more than most married people can ever claim. I looked around the lounge, which was very much more hers than mine, especially the books. Robert Owen and William Morris, Max Gorky, Lennon, and treasured Drabridge, dog-eared left book club books. When Laura became left, she did it, as she did most things, with a serious, wholehearted enthusiasm. I was pleased. I'd decided not to stay on the flat after she went, because there was too much to remind me of her everywhere I looked. Now we were going to split it up. It was better for the break to be quite clean with nothing to arouse nostalgic memories. I went out myself half an hour later. The youth group of the local Labour Party had asked me to give a talk upon the dangers of radiation fallout. There was nothing I could tell them that they couldn't have found for themselves by spending an hour at the local library. But creating an active opposition to the social menace of exploding test bomb, I believe, was worth my while. So I talked for an hour. I answered questions for another hour, tactfully declined the chairman's good-humored invitation to join the Labour Party, and hurried away. I hurried away, but I had nowhere to go. These last few weeks since Laura had exploded her bombing shell about marrying Harry, I'd felt the loss of her company, increasingly on Saturdays. I felt in the time the way I'd learned to fritter away my other Saturdays during these past weeks. I went to the cinema, dined early, and went to my squash club and played as many games as I could find partners. Leaping around the squash courts in shorts and vests and smashing at the ball furiously, and beyond hope of retrievement by my partner, gave me a strange and savage satisfaction. Afterwards, I went into the gym for a workout on the parallel bars and followed up with a 10 minutes on the trapeze bar. I rounded off with a quick dip in the plunge pool and a brisk rub down. I walked all the way back to the flat with my skin toned up, my blood pulsing quickly, and a healthy, satisfied feeling of physical well-being. Laura wasn't home, but I didn't expect her to be. She must have returned quite late, because I read until 1 o'clock in bed, and then dropped off to sleep without hearing her turn the key in the lock. I dreamed about soft, dough-brown eyes and woke up once, sweating, sticky, and uncomfortable.